the service itself will start at 1, and then we'll try to, have lunch afterwards over in the gym. So that's all the announcements that I have. So we'll get started tonight with the 71st Psalm. Verse 1 says, actually, a little background before we go further into this, or actually even get started. The author is uncertain. So most of your Bibles at the beginning of the title section for this particular psalm don't list an author. And the reason being is we're not really sure. We do know it was a part of the Hebrew Psalter, so that's never been in question. It's probably a Psalm of David. It follows his basic pattern of writing. It uses a lot of the same phraseology that David uses, so we'll see that in verse 2 in particular, which really sounds like it would fit in almost any of David's Psalms. Well, really, the whole Psalm sounds like it would fit in any of David's Psalms. Because as you know, when God inspired these men, he chose them on purpose, and he used their particular personalities and kind of infused that into the Word, I believe, as a way to make it easier for us to understand. And so God used them to write the things that he wanted to write at that period of time. But it does seem to be a Psalm of David, but we don't know that for certain, so you very rarely see it attributed to David in the Bible, in your Bible anyway. So I have to admit, the title in my Bible got my attention. So my Bible doesn't have the author, but it does have a title. And it said the title of Psalm 71 was, "Forsake me not when my strength is spent." Another man that I know and love, who was my pastor when I was younger, titled the 71st Psalm as "Forsake me not when I grow old." So I think you could probably, if you'll see in a moment, you could apply both to that. But he used to preach out of this, and it was his view that we never get too old to serve the Lord. Our tasks just change as we grow older. So I think there's great truth in that, and we'll see some things in here that do deal with that. Because I think aging is a thing that we all struggle with, especially as we start to get older. When you're young, you don't really think too much about it. As you hit middle age, you start to realize you can't do everything you used to do, and a lot of things you still can do, you can't do as well as you could before. And then as you get even older, you really start to have more limitations than you like to admit that you have. And then we start getting closer to glory, and really things start to break down in our body. So we'll talk about that tonight, because this psalm actually addresses that. It certainly addresses that, because it's one of the things that the psalmist is referring to, is the fact that he's growing older, and he's concerned about what his purpose will be as he gets older. So verse 1 says, "In you, O Lord, I have taken refuge. Let me never be put to shame." Again, this really sounds like David. It just sounds like a lot of the Davidic Psalms we've already studied. Again, kind of the same basic mindset. The psalmist is talking about how in his life he has taken refuge in the Lord, and the Lord has provided him with protection, safety, provision, and strength. In some translations, it's actually, there's a couple things in here that are a little different from one translation to another. In the NASB, at the end, it says, "Let me never be put to shame." I think in the King James, it says, "Never let me be confused," or "Never let me fall into a state of confusion." In the Hebrew, it's not really confusing. It's just that I think at different times we use different English words to translate the meaning. Because the basic premise is, do not let me get to the point that I am disappointed in trusting you. So that's the basic premise. That's why in modern translations they tend to use the term shame. In the King James, they use the word confusion. I think that's what it is in the King James, confusion. So the basic premise is still the same. The psalmist is praying that God would help him to have strength, and that his faith would get deeper rather than begin to weaken as he faces difficult times. And again, this sounds so much like David, because he's constantly dealing with persecution in his life, tragedy and heartache, sorrow, death, all these things that he had constantly been having to deal with, the betrayal of friends. David went through a lot in his lifetime, and it tested his faith. And his prayer was consistent, that God would use those things to help him to grow, and that he would not pull away from God. And he knew that he was weak. A lot of people thought David was really strong, but David knew himself really well, and he knew where his weaknesses were, and he was deeply concerned that without God's help, he would actually pull away from God, and his faith would begin to decrease rather than increase. And so that's kind of the idea here. He's asking God in sort of this plaintive way, please never let me get to the point where I begin to either be confused or to be ashamed that I have put my trust in you. Verse 2. in your righteousness, rescue me and save me. Extend your ear to me and help me. And so we see several things in here that, again, very typical of David's writing. Things like rescue me, save me, listen to me, which is what extend your ear to me means. It's sort of a poetic way of saying, please listen to me, hear my cry, help me. So again, we see these same basic themes pretty much in all the Davidic Psalms. Rescue me, save me, listen to me, and help me. And I think we would all be able to relate to that. We pray that way often, don't we? Especially when times are difficult. If someone is persecuting us or mistreating us, we often cry out to God to rescue us and save us. We ask God to please listen to us as we deal with the difficulties of life. And then, of course, we're always asking God to help us, as we should, because we are in desperate need of His help. And it really doesn't matter what circumstance we're in, we are always in desperate need of God's help. Because if we're not careful in the good times, we forget about God. We begin to get full of ourselves. So we need God to keep us close and to keep us humble. In the bad times, our strength begins to fade. We begin to have doubts. We begin to get confused. And we need God to help us have clarity and strength. And so we're always, regardless of where we are in life, we're always in need of God's help. We always have something to be rescued from, or we're going to have something we're going to need to be rescued from coming up. And so this is a good way to pray, and you should pray this way on a consistent basis, constantly seeking God's help. It's God to rescue, to save, and to listen to your prayers. Verses 3 through 5. I put all this on there. I know it's kind of small print, but the more I looked at it, the more I realized you really got to read this together, because this is a poetic way of elaborating on verse 2. So verse 2 says everything very plainly. You know, help me, save me, hear me. Really clear, really short, really plain. Now verses 3 through 5, he says basically the same things, but much more elaborately. Sort of poetic, if you will. So verse 3 says, be to me a rock of dwelling to which I may continually come. Well, what would that be? God is his refuge. You have given the commandment to save me. What did he cry out in verse 2? Save me. So this is a little more elaborate. You have given the commandment to save me. So he's confident that God has always been his refuge and will always be his refuge. And he's also confident that God has already given the commandment to save him even before he prays for salvation or prays to be saved from whatever it is he's seeking to be saved from. For you are my rock and my fortress. What a beautiful way to describe the refuge that God is for us. Save me, my God, from the hand of the wicked. So now we get a lot more words attached to the phrase, save me. He's telling us exactly what he feels like in that moment he needs to be saved from. And that is from those people who are mistreating him, those who are persecuting him, the wicked who are coming after him because he's a servant of God. And so he's asking for God to save him from the hand of the wicked, from the grasp of the wrongdoer and the ruthless. So we continue to be poetic and to elaborate on what he wants to be saved from. And again, you see it's this general concept that as a righteous man, he's being attacked by the unrighteous, and they are trying to destroy him. Not just mistreat him and persecute him, but they are actually trying to destroy him. And so he's crying out to God to save him from them. So he says, for you are my hope. He knows that on his own he's going to be overwhelmed, but he has hope in the Lord because he believes that God can keep him from being overwhelmed. And I love the end. So verse 5 kind of moves out of the poetry part and the elaboration on all these things that he discussed in verse 2. And the end talks about why he's so confident. He says, you are my confidence from my youth. So even when he was a child, again, this really sounds like David, doesn't it? Even when he was a child, who did he trust? God. That's why even as a child he faced, what was it, a lion? That's pretty powerful, isn't it? He also faced a giant, if I'm not mistaken, right? That is in the Bible. He faced a giant as a lad, yeah, with a sling and a few what? Stones. Again, not because he had confidence in himself, but because he had confidence in God. And so this was something that this person, even if it's not David, again, it sounds a lot like David, but it could be someone else because there are other people who have trusted God since they were children. He says, my confidence or my hope is in you, and it always has been. Even when I was really young, I put my confidence in you. I found hope in you. I trusted you and depended on you even when I was young. And I've met some young people. I've met some children who really have faith. They really do trust God. They find their hope in Him, not in something or someone someone else, but in God and God alone. And those children tend to grow up to be powerful people of faith. They grow up to just have this strong, deep, abiding faith. David was that way, and again, the psalmist, whoever it is that way, obviously, based on the way in which he's speaking and writing this particular song. And this was really something that, as the Hebrew people would sing, hopefully it would filter down to their children. You don't have to be an old man to have faith. Is that true? Yeah, young men can have faith, can't they? Teenage boys can have faith. I'm going to tell you right now, a 9-year-old boy can have faith. And they can have a strong faith, a deep faith. It doesn't really have an age on it. I've met people in their 80s who've been in the church for 60 years who probably had less faith than some of the 9-year-olds I met, right? Just be honest. Age is not a determiner of faith. The heart is. It's how much we do or we don't trust God. And I've met children that trust God. I've met children who don't trust God. I've met older people who trust God, and I've met older people who don't trust God. In this particular case, this man is growing older, and his trust for God, if anything, has increased through the years, but it started when he was young. And that's something that he tells us in verse 5, that this hope in God, this trust in God, started when he was very young and has continued through his life as he's grown older. And this man has grown older who is writing this song. Verse 6, I have leaned on you since my birth. So looking back now, he realizes that he's always kind of leaned on God and been dependent on God. And he recognizes that when he was born as a baby, he was helpless, and it was God who took care of him. He says, you are he who took me from my mother's womb. My praise is continually of you. And what he's recognizing in verse 6 is he's not saying that God yanked him out of his mother's womb. What he's saying is that God is the one who gave him life, and as he was born, God is the one who oversaw his birth. God, in other words, has been his sustainer since his beginning. Going all the way back to when he was in the womb, he says, God has been the one who has constantly sustained me. So what he's getting at in verse 5 and 6 is that his confidence, if anything, as he's grown older, has simply gotten stronger, because not only does he just have faith that he had really at a young age, he also now has experience. He has seen that trusting in God is always the right way to go. He knew it kind of instinctively younger, which is amazing. Clearly God was working in his life. But as he's grown older now, he has all these experiences, all these events in his life where God has always been with him. God has always carried him through and delivered him and rescued him and saved him, so that when hard times come, he just cries out to God, believing that somehow, some way, God's going to save him. Maybe not the way that he wants, but a way that will work, a way that is what's best for him, as God knows far more than he does. And so he's just put himself in the hands of God. He has from his youth, and if anything, he's gotten more convinced that that's exactly the only way you should live your life. And so he continues, as he grows older, to put himself completely in the hands of God and to trust God to watch over him and care for him. And that's going to be important as we get into this a little bit more, that this, again, started in his youth. He's now grown older, probably much older, and if anything, he has grown deeper and stronger in his faith, and he has learned through experience that you're never going to be disappointed if you trust God. He may not do things the way you want, but he will always do what's best, and he will always grow you through whatever it is you have to go through. So verse 7 and 8, he says, I have become a marvel to many. And he realizes that other people kind of look up to him. They look at him and they see someone who's not just like everybody else. But he also then gives glory to God. He says, the reason I'm different is for you are my strong refuge. It's because you have always been with me. You have always supported me and protected me and cared for me. You're the one who has given me strength. You're the one who has granted me wisdom. You're the one who has transformed my life. And so I am who I am by your grace. I am truly the work of your hands. Now, if you're a person who has grown in your faith and you have been, let's say you got saved when you were younger and you trusted God, you put your faith in Him. Nobody's saying you're perfect, and certainly not saying that your faith didn't grow. It certainly did. But you have been consistent. So you have been consistently following God. Let's say you got saved when you were 10 and you're 70 now. That would mean that for 60 years you have been consistently trusting God. Is that true? And you would probably, I think, all agree that you trust God even more now than you did when you got saved at, say, 10. Would you agree with that? Does that trust, that faith, and I like to use the word trust if you haven't noticed, because really that's the biggest component of faith is trust. You just trust Him. You have put all your trust in Him. That's a big component of faith. Do you think other people see that? They absolutely do. And as it grows, it becomes even more obvious. Would you agree with that? That the more your faith grows, the more obvious it becomes. You can't hide it. Why would you want to hide it anyway, right? But you couldn't hide it if you wanted to. The deeper and the stronger that your faith gets, the more apparent it becomes to the people around you. And not just the people that know you well, but even people that meet you and get to know you a little bit because they see something significantly different about your life. So that's all the psalmist is saying here. People should be able to look at our life, and they may not even like our life. You don't have to like something to marvel at it, by the way. He's not saying that everybody likes the way he lives. He just says that people recognize that he doesn't live like everybody else. And when they begin to wonder why, well, the next verse, verse 8, tells us they don't have to wait long to wonder why his life is different, because he says, my mouth is filled with your praise and with your glory all day long. So he states the fact about why his life is significantly different than everybody else's by praising God. In other words, he's giving God all the credit for all the differences in his life and all the ways that he's different from everybody else. It's all because of God, the work that God has done in his life, and the fact that he trusts God and he seeks to follow God wherever God leads him. So if God leads him to do something, he tries to do that. If God leads him to live his life in a way that's completely different than everybody else, he strives to live his life that way. And so he constantly then gives the credit and the glory to God for who he is. And so his mouth is filled with praise. Not just the credit either, by the way, but he celebrates what God has done in his life, and he celebrates who God is. That's what praise is. It's recognizing the infinite worth of God and then rejoicing in that infinite worth. And that's what he's been doing. Recognizing what God has done in your life is thanksgiving, and he's also thankful. And he recognizes what God has done in his life, and he gives God the credit for it, and he's thankful for it. So this is where he is. So we've built up through verse 8 to talk about how he started out and where he has progressed to as he has grown older. And then we get to verse 9. And I think he gets into something that, as I said earlier, every one of us really begins to think about as we get older. He says in verse 9, do not cast me away at the time of my old age. Do not abandon me when my strength fails. Now, that second part could be taken a lot of different ways, and that could really happen to anybody. People, even younger people, can get sick or get into difficult circumstances or have something really bad happen in their life, and their strength will fail. But in the context, he's talking about as we age, we tend to lose strength in our flesh. Our body begins to weaken. We begin to break down. We begin to have more limitations in what we can do and how long we can do it than we had before. In fact, we begin to get sometimes to the point we can't even hardly get out and do anything. And I think that's the correct context based on the way in which this passage is written. But again, we'll address the issue with persecution and difficult times in just a few verses, because he does kind of bounce back to other things outside of growing old. But in this particular sentence, he's talking about growing old. Everybody with me so far? It's kind of important. Okay. So he says, basically, when I get older and I'm not able to serve you in the way that I have since I was young, please don't cast me away. Now, he's exposing something here, because again, all Scripture is inspired. So when the Spirit inspires or moves upon a man to write honestly, to write truthfully, the question is, why is he expressing this? Why is this expression of do not cast me away at the time of my old age? You would think, as a man of faith, that he would know that God's not going to cast him away just because he can't do the things he used to do. You would think that, correct? But let's be honest. How many of us, as we get older and we realize we're not going to be able to do the things that we've done in the past, we're not going to be able to work as hard or as long, we're not going to be able to maybe go to as many places as we used to, we're just not going to be able to serve God the way we did. Things are going to slow down. How often do we begin to think that God might be done with us and is ready to replace us? Nobody? Hey, you don't have to lie to me. Does that thought ever cross your mind? I hope not, because it really shouldn't, because God doesn't discard His people because they get older. But in our culture in particular, which celebrates youth at the expense of experience, which we do, by the way, watch TV. What happens to an older actress or actor as a general rule? Do they get more parts or less parts? Less parts. So as an actor or an actress grows older, they get less parts. Why do you think they get less parts? Let's just be honest about it. Why do they get less parts? They're not as pretty. They look, I hate to use the word, old. And so our culture kind of teaches through things like that as you get old, you lose value. And that's the lesson that's taken from that. As you get old, you lose value. Now, in their culture, they had similar things culturally. There were ideas. Some nations, in fact, you know how some nations dealt with their old? They took them out and got rid of them. My son is a student of Vikings. He loves everything Viking. I don't know if we have Norwegian in our background or what, but you've seen him. He kind of looks like a Viking, right? You know, so he's fascinated by it. You know how the Vikings dealt with their old? When you got too old to fend for yourself, and by fend for yourself, I mean go out and hunt your own food or raise your own food, they took you out and got rid of you, literally. They would throw you off the side of a cliff or into the water, you know, and if you could swim out, you could live in the village a little longer. I mean, it's cruel. But again, the cultural mindset, so this is something that the psalmist would have been familiar with in his world as well, that older people become more of a burden than they are help, so you get rid of them. And I'm not trying to be cruel, I'm just telling you the reality. And so that then carries over. So we carry a lot of those thoughts that we pick up on the world, from the world around us, we carry those over sometimes into our relationship with God, and we have to be really careful about that. Now, he's going to come back and deal with this as the Spirit of God moves him and directs him. You'll see that it's dealt with, but I think it's very insightful here that we often overlook passages like this, that if you ever do begin to think you become useless as you grow older, you're not the first one. Even as people of faith, you're not going to be the first one that thought that. Let me tell you a better way to think about it, if you haven't already figured it out, and I'll give you some more as we work our way through, but here's one. Things change as you grow older. Missions change as you grow older. In the New Testament, it talks about the zeal of youth, but then it also talks about the wisdom of the old. That youth tend to have passion and zeal, and they're ready to go without thinking, right? They just jump in. The older person, though, tends to be a little more hesitant. They like to look at the situation and think before they jump in. And he says that if you put those two together, they complement one another. The older bring their wisdom to the table to help influence the younger, who often are foolish and kind of just do things without really thinking them through. And the young then can bring that energy and that strength of flesh, at least, into the equation. And if they'll follow the direction of the wise, the older, together they can do tremendous things. That's, by the way, kind of the theme of the book of Titus, if you haven't noticed. That's why churches that are not multi-generational are doomed to fail, because they're not really biblical. There really is no biblical example of people gathering based on age. And by the way, churches that are primarily old are going to die because without youth to take their place, they will have an end date. And that was never God's intention. It was never supposed to function that way. The older people were to take their wisdom and share it with the younger people who were to learn. We'll talk about that more in a moment. But now things are going to change for this man. And that's what's hard then. I think that's where we struggle. We don't like change. We don't like change. But my job's going to change. My mission changes. I mean, when I was a father, I had one task. That was to protect my children when they were small and try to raise them in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. I looked at that, and it was, whether it's providing what they needed or protecting them from weird people. Man, and you got to do that. Today, we live in weird times, and we've lived in weird times for about 5 decades now. You've got to protect your kids. You've got to try to provide for them. You've got to try to teach them everything that God has taught you. Those are my priorities. My grandkids, I try to do somewhat the same things, but I'm more interested in fun, right? I want them to know they are loved. That's my main goal. I want them to know God loves them. Now, if my son's not around and you come around my grandkids, guess who's going to protect them? Pop, pop. That's what he does. Pop's liable to pop you if you get too close to his grandkids. So, that's kind of the same mindset, but not to the same degree because my mission has changed. I'm a little bit older. I realize there are some people I probably couldn't protect my grandkids from, but my son certainly could because that's a change. So as you change, as you grow old, God changes your assignment a little bit. And there are different ways that he changes that. And that's good. That's the way it should be. And the psalmist, I think, especially if this is David, you can see how he would begin to wonder, maybe God's just done with me. Maybe God's going to throw me away and replace me with somebody younger. And I think people start to think that way, and it's sad because just because our assignment changes doesn't mean that God has thrown us away. God does not throw away his people. He may reassign them. He may change his mission for them slightly. They may have different priorities than they had before based on just what they can and can't do. But he's not done. He's not tossing you off to the side. Things just change. So I think, again, great warning there. In verse 10 and 11, he comes back to the strength failing, not just because of growing older, but also because of being worn out, because there's kind of a both and going on there. For my enemies have spoken against me, and those who watch for my life have consulted together, saying, God has abandoned him. Pursue and seize him, for there is no one to save him. When you look at this, is it true that people look for weakness to exploit? In David's case, you certainly see that, right? Again, I'll just say, I think David wrote Psalm 71. Is it okay if I just work from that premise rather than dancing around it? I try not to read into a passage, and if I don't know something for certain, I try not to say it. But if you read this, it just sounds so much like something David would write, from being a man of faith from his youth to going through a lot of things and trusting God and having more confidence in God because of all the things God's brought him through. So let's just say this is David. If not, it's truly reflective of his life. When David got weak, people that he loved and trusted betrayed him and attacked him. In fact, they got together and did it, right? They conspired against him. And they took away the throne. And they said, God has abandoned him. And that's exactly what they said about David. We were only able to do this because God himself has abandoned him. Now let's pursue him and seize him, for there's no one to save him, because God has tossed him aside. Now, if this is David, and he's growing older, because this happened in the latter years of his life, you kind of get where verse 9 might come from. Everybody else was ready to throw him away. He'd gotten older. He'd gotten a little weaker. He wasn't able to do the things he used to do. He'd made some terrible sinful choices and had done terrible things to other people. And now everybody, it's kind of like Shark Week, You ever seen Shark Week? They throw the chum in the water, and what do the sharks all start to do? They start to go crazy. So all the sharks are circling. Now they're going crazy. They see blood in the water. They feel like it's time. He's old. He's done. He's washed up. God's finished with him. And that's what everybody else is saying. He's just beginning to wonder if it's true. Maybe God is done with me. I've grown too old for this. I can't keep up the way that I used to. I can't lead the way that I used to. I'm not strong as I used to be physically. I can't do those long days, and I can't work as hard as I used to. And so God's going to throw me away like everybody else. My wife, we were talking the other day on the way to Newcastle. So Tuesday we went down to spend some time with Tabitha. We stopped by the funeral home to pick up some molds they'd made of the baby. And on our way down, we were talking about growing older. And she was talking about something that she had seen on television about people who are aging in our culture, in our country, in our neighborhoods. And talking about how older people now will often do whatever they can to hold on to control over their children, their grandchildren, other people in their lives. And that the reason, when they interviewed a bunch of older people and asked them why they're trying so desperately to hold on to control, is that they were afraid of being abandoned and left alone. I think everybody has this fear of being abandoned. And part of it is we have seen so many people abandon us in our lives, whether they didn't like something we said or did, or they just didn't like us, or they just used us, and when they were done using us, they threw us away like trash. And I think a lot of people have those kinds of experiences in their life, whether it's family, friends, husbands and wives. I mean, many people have lived this out and have felt the hurt of that and have felt lonely because they felt like they had been abandoned and thrown away. Now, David would be able to identify with that. That's why I think this is his psalm. And in verse 9, I think what he's looking at is he's beginning to question. He's beginning to falter a little bit because he's talking about his strength failing. And I think it's not just his strength. Maybe it's starting to affect his faith a little bit. And he's concerned that just maybe God's going to treat him like everybody else. And I think sometimes we carry that thought over. We begin to see all the people in our lives who have betrayed us, all the people who have let us down and turned on us for various things. And maybe something doesn't go quite right, and we think that maybe, just maybe, God has turned on us as well. And we have to be careful with that, because that's a dangerous thought, isn't it? And as we grow older, we start to have a lot more infirmities. We start to get sick a lot more. We start to have more severe illnesses than we've ever had before. And it's easy to fall into that trap, to begin to think that God has finished with you, that He's no longer really watching over you. He's no longer protecting you. You no longer have that great health that you had all the other days of your life, and now it's gone. And we forget, though, that because of sin, all of our bodies are growing older. And part of growing older is breaking down, because you can't go home until you break down completely. But we don't want to think about that. We just want everything to be fine. We start to realize that everything's not fine. And we have all these bad experiences in the past with other people. We have all these things now that are not as good as they used to be. And other people might even begin to say, well, you know why? It's because God has abandoned you. And it begins to eat away at your mind. And it begins to put poison in your heart. You following the thread with me? But he's not done yet. This is just where he is. He's processing. Again, David, great thinker. He thought things through the lens that God gave him to think through. And so he processes through things. He doesn't avoid topics. He deals with it. He deals with the thoughts of his mind, the feelings of his heart. And he says in verse 12, God, do not be far from me. Now, why would he say that? Well, in that moment, he feels like God is not near. Now, that's not true, right? God's always near. But do you sometimes feel like He's not? Well, yeah, if David did, I bet you do too. I do. Sometimes you don't feel like He's near. So David does what we all ought to do. He cries out, do not be far from me. In other words, I need to know, because I'm beginning to wonder, I need to know if you're here with me, if you're still near to me. Are you done with me? He says, my God, hurry to my aid. So again, any way in which that God would just kind of remind him that He is right there. May those, and then he talks about, again, not taking vengeance for himself, but recognizing he has many enemies. He says, may those who are the enemies of my soul be put to shame and consumed. So again, he's not just saying they're enemies to me. He's not just looking at the physical threat. He's more focused on what this is doing to his very soul. And he recognizes these people who are trying to destroy him, they're just trying to completely obliterate him. And he is more concerned about his soul than he is his flesh, which is very wise, by the way. Your body's not nearly as important as your soul is. If it was, you wouldn't have New Testament passages that tell you bodily exercises of little profit, but growing in your faith has infinite profit. So we know what's most important because the Bible tells us what's most important. And the soul is the most important. And so he recognizes that what is under the biggest threat is his very soul. And he says, God, you take care of them. I can't do this. I can't handle this anymore. I'm at the end of my strength. Do whatever is necessary to protect me. May those who are the enemies of my soul be put to shame and consumed. You deal with them. You take care of this. May they be covered with disgrace and dishonor who seek to injure me. So those that are trying to injure me and destroy me, I'm going to put them in your hands and let you deal with it. And I'll tell you, if you take that attitude, and it doesn't have to be people, it doesn't have to be persecution or mistreatment. It can be anything. It can be an illness. You've got a bad diagnosis at the doctor, and you're going through a really tough time trying to deal with it and figure it out and why, all these questions you have. The best way to deal with that is cry out to God. If it's God's will to remove it, ask Him to remove it. There's nothing wrong with asking for healing. But then also ask for strength if God doesn't heal you. Help me to endure whatever it is that I have to endure. Help me to go through it with strength. Help me to go through it with dignity and grace, that I can glorify you as I go through what it is that I'm having to go through. And again, you could put anything in there. It doesn't matter. In this particular case, we know that he's being persecuted. Those who have seen weakness in him are are trying to destroy him. They've turned on him, and it's affecting him in his soul, not just in his flesh. Verse 14 through 16. Not 14 and 6, 14 through 16. Another long passage, but it all goes together, so I put it on the same screen. But as for me, I will wait continually. Okay, so now you're beginning to see. So he's processed through. He's beginning, as he prays, to realize that he's not been abandoned, that God is not quite done with him yet, that there's something else for him yet to do. He says, and as for me, I'll just wait continually. I'll wait forever if I have to, because I know you're still there. You've reminded me, and I know you're still there. And I know you're still with me, and you're still working in my life. And then, as a byproduct of that, and we'll praise you yet more and more. So I'm just going to continue to praise you more and more. There is a great solution, and that is prayer and praise. As the more you pray and praise, the better off you'll be if you're going through difficult times. And so he says, I'm just going to continue to praise you. I'm going to continue to sing praise. I'm going to continue to speak praise. I'm going to tell people how amazing you are, how wonderful you are. Because he goes on, he says, my mouth shall tell of your righteousness and of your salvation all day long. So I'm never going to stop. If I have to wait forever, so be it. I will continue while I wait to praise you in every way imaginable. For I do not know the art of writing. Whoever's writing this, very humble person's a great writer if you haven't noticed. But you know why they're a great writer? Because they're not the ones writing it. The Spirit of God is, right? They're just like a pen in the hand of the master. So the masters, you don't have to be a good author if you're in the hands of the pen. I can't even talk. It's a good thing, right? You don't have to be a great author if you're in the hands of the master author. The words are going to be amazing, and the words here are amazing. They do come from a man's heart, a broken man that God is using to speak to us all these thousands of years later. And he's been speaking to his people for thousands of years before us. I do not know the art of writing. That's okay, God does. I will come with the mighty deeds of the Lord God. So here's what he does know. I can't write. I'm not a good speaker, but I do know God, and he's amazing. And I ain't ever going to get tired of talking about all the amazing things God has done in my life. That's what he's saying. So I'm just going to keep on. I'm going to keep on waiting, even if I have to wait forever, and I'm going to keep on praising God. I will make mention of your righteousness, yours alone. So he said, I'm not going to build myself up. I'm not going to parade myself out there. I'm not going to talk about my righteousness. I'm just going to talk about yours. Yours alone is perfect. Yours alone is worthy of talking about. And so he said, I know who I serve. I know who has me. And I'm going to talk about all he's done in my life and all the things I've seen him do in other people's life. I'm going to talk about how awesome he is, how powerful he is, how loving and kind he is. I'm just going to talk about you, and I'm going to praise you, and I'm going to lift your name up before all. And I'll do it as long as I can, even if I have to wait forever. Because he's not looking at an end date. He's just saying, I'm going to continually and patiently wait for you, and in the meantime, I'm going to praise you. He goes on in verse 17 and 18. He says, God, you have taught me from my youth. So he goes back again to the very beginning. I know that I am who I am because you've been working in my life since I was a child. I still declare your wondrous deeds. So as I did when I was young, I now do when I'm old. And even when I am old and gray, God, do not abandon me. So, he's a little bit older because you don't even think about being old and gray until you start to be a little bit old and gray. I never thought about getting old until I looked in the mirror one day and realized I didn't have any hair in my head except gray ones. It was like overnight, my beard went from bright red to white. It's just like it changed. And then you start to think about it, right? You start to think about growing old, and you start to think about limitations. And he says, so don't abandon me. Don't give up on me. Because I have a task to do, and I know I have a task to do. And do you think that's a sign of a lack of faith, or is that humility in asking God to continue to use you when you're old? I think it's humility and asking God to help you to have just enough strength to be able to serve Him as you grow old. Just enough. Not asking for too much, not asking for perfect health, not asking for the ability to jump around and skip around like I did when I was 20, asking for just enough strength to be able to get up and preach, or just enough strength to walk over to my children and share something great about God with them. Just enough. Give me enough ability to think and enough ability to speak, to tell people how awesome you are, because that's what he wants to finish with. And you know why he would finish here? Because this is the right place to finish. He's got years of experience. until I declare your strength to this generation, your power to all who are to come. So here's what I want as I grow old. I just want enough strength to continue to tell everybody about how amazing my God is. I got a lot of experience. I got a lot of things that God has done in my life that are wonderful and amazing and miraculous. Just give me a little more strength so I can share with a few more, some younger people, about how awesome God is. So I can tell some young men that, hey, you're never going to go wrong if you trust God. You are going to go wrong if you don't. In fact, it's the exact opposite. You will always go wrong sooner or later if you don't trust God. If you do trust Him, you're always heading in the right direction. And He will never disappoint you. He may not do things the way you want. You may get confused and upset at times, but He will never let go of you, and He will never let you down. Eventually, He will teach you, and He will show you, and He will grow you, and you will be stronger than you were when you started. I just want to tell people that. And so you can do that when you're 90, 95. As long as God gives you just that little bit of strength to stand, even if it's just for a moment, and speak, even if it's just for a minute. And it's powerful. You know, the people who have been the greatest influence in my life are all dead. They're all dead. But you know why they were a great influence on my life? Because when I was a stupid 18, 19, 20, 21, 22-year-old man doing dumb things and running around like an idiot, they loved me and they spoke wisdom into my life. And they told me how great God was. And I started to listen. And I realized that the one in me was the same one that was in them. And I agreed with them. He was just as awesome as they said he was. So why was I acting like a fool? And I stopped acting like a fool, and I started to act like a wise man, and I started to grow. And those same men came alongside me as a young pastor, and they guided me, and they strengthened me, and their phone was always on if I needed to ask a question. I miss those guys. Right? I'll see them again someday, but I do miss them. But they impacted my life, and they were old. And I don't mean that in a bad way. They were even older than I am now. You know how when you get older, you realize that old's not what you thought it was? When you're 20, 40's old. When you're 40, 60's old. And I guess when you're 60, 80's is old. I don't know. If you're 80, I don't know if anybody's older than you or not. Couldn't help. Sorry. No, somebody's older than you, right? People who are 100. It's like we go in 20-year increments. There's always somebody older until there's not. Doesn't matter. Again, culture. We think about age and we look at it negatively. But now that I'm 50, almost 59, I know a lot more than I did. I have a lot more life experience than I did. And I have a better understanding of who God is. How can any of that be bad? Right? Every bit of that's good. If you're older tonight, by older I mean whatever your age is, and you have all this life experience, quit holding it in. If you have all these things in your life that God has done, quit keeping quiet and start telling people. Look for a young person and say, hey, I want to tell you how awesome God is. I just want to tell you some things that He's done in my life. As long as you got the strength and you've got the ability to talk, you still have a purpose. And you say, well, that's not much of a purpose. I'm telling you right now, if you look at the book of Titus, it's one of the most important purposes we have ever in our lives. To take what we have learned and share it with those who are younger than us so that they will learn and begin to rise up as well. So again, that's his prayer. He wants this to be the way it is for his life. Let me finish. I'm running out of time. I'm going to finish this chapter. 19 through 21 kind of begins to wrap it up. He says, for your righteousness, God, reaches to the heavens. So here's again, he's starting to talk about why it's so important that he praise God, glorify God, and tell others about all the amazing things God has done in his life, because God is worthy. If there's anybody you're going to celebrate that's worth being celebrated, it's God. If there's anybody you're going to praise who's worth being praised, it's God. In fact, it's God alone. If there's anyone that you're going to speak highly of, it ought to be God. He said, you have done great things. That's a great way to summarize it, isn't it? God has done great things in my life and around me. God, who is like you? No one, by the way. You who have shown me many troubles and distresses will revive me again. He said, I know that you have allowed these things in my life, but you have consistently grown me and you have revived me over and over again and will bring me up again from the depths of the earth. So this is where he's at in his life. Whatever he's in right now, he realizes God's going to bring him out of it one way or another, and it will be for his good in the end. May you increase my greatness and turn to comfort me. Now you think at the end that doesn't make any sense. May you increase my greatness. You know what he's saying there? As I finish this journey through whatever it is I'm in right now, continue to grow me. Continue to grow me so that I am greater than I was when I entered in. And what's the goal of that? Well, to be able to praise God even more, because that's what he finishes with in 22 and 23 and 4. I will praise you with a harp, and your truth, my God, I will sing praises to you with the lyre, Holy One of Israel. My lips will shout for joy when I sing praises to you, and my soul which you have redeemed. And then finishes it with verse 24. My tongue also will tell of your righteousness all day long, for they are put to shame, for they are humiliated who seek my harm. So he says, I know who my champion is. I know that everything will work out in the end according to his will. In the meantime, I'm going to praise him. I'm going to tell others about him. And I'm going to be as useful as I can be. I'll take whatever strength, whatever opportunity God gives me, and I will use it. And when he's finished with me, you know what? He's going to call me home. He's going to call me home. Ain't that a great way to look at life? So if you're here tonight and you're older and you think you're too old, you're here, which means something, right? First thing it means you have the ability to get up and go. I believe, because I was listening to you all before I got up to preach, you can all still talk. So if you can get up and go and you can talk, guess what you can do? You can go to someone and you can tell them about how awesome God is. Tell me that's not a good enough purpose for you to get out of bed for in the morning. Isn't that really our highest purpose of all? So you're not too old, are you? And God hasn't thrown you away, and you're not abandoned just because things ain't going the way you want them to go, and it'll all be fine. Just keep on doing what God has called you to do. Mike, let's do prayer request.